Act 14. When he had truly started treating Maya as his assistant, Kiritsugu had put a spell on a strand of her hair and embedded it in the subcutaneous tissue of his little finger. At the same time, Maya had also embedded a strand of Kiritsugu's hair in her finger. If the magic circuits of one of them entered a state of extreme stagnation, the stage at which one's life force was weak on the verge of impasse with death, the strand of hair given to the other person would burn, warning the other and notifying them of the existence of danger. That was a measure implemented for a worst-case scenario in which it was already impossible to use a wireless network or familiar to convey information. That is to say, it was only a signal to inform that it is already too late. For it to activate now, at this moment, what exactly could it mean? Before wavering, one must first be caught in a quandary. Kiritsugu mobilized all his neurons and began to ponder the situation at hand, as well as to formulate response plans. Maya was on the verge of death. In other words, this meant that Irisfield, hidden in the underground storage, was in danger. The sequence of events and its cause could not be determined now. Now, the absolute priority was to carry out help as soon as possible. The only method that could be chosen was the fastest, a miracle made possible by the command seals on his right hand.
I order my puppet in the name of the command seals.
Kiritsugu clenched his fist, at the same time reciting the spell as quickly as an automatic machine.
Saber, return to the underground storage quickly. At once.
The prana sleeping in one of the command seals carved on the back of Kiritsugu's hand woke up and shone with light. It was not an overstatement to say that Saber was very surprised. She immediately understood that she had become the subject of some powerful magecraft. In the next instant, she was stripped of all recognition of the surrounding space and sent into the midst of a transfer that did not have an existence or direction. That was probably the legendary spell specifically meant to command servants. With an ultimate speed that neared destruction of the laws of cause and effect, she had already overcome the distance of space in a moment of a few milliseconds at a speed close to that of light and completed the instantaneous movement between two different points in space. Even so, she was indeed a sword-wielding heroic spirit of special conditioning. Though she had just been transported from a chair beside a bus stop to a completely different place, the familiarity of the underground storage made her understand immediately that the strange phenomenon just now was caused by the activation of one of Kiritsugu's command seals. In addition, some emergency must have occurred here that necessitated her immediate return to guard the headquarters. In the few milliseconds between the completion of the space break and her arrival on the floor of the underground storage, Saber had already completed the transformation from her disguise suit to her silver-white armor. Without question, the situation was clear at a glance. The metal door had been broken down with brute strength. Irisfield, who should have been lying in the middle of the magic circle, had vanished. In her place was the body of Maya, covered in blood, writhing and discarded. Saber quickly ran to her side. She could not help but furrow her brow at the depth of her wounds. The injuries sustained in the Einsburn forest could not even begin to compare with this. What she sustained now were injuries that were fatal if not given emergency treatment as soon as possible. As if feeling the servant's radiant presence, Maya slowly opened her eyes.
But
Maya pushed away the hand that Saber stretched out to her.
quickly. Go after him quickly, outside. Ryder,
If the command seal-induced voyage here had been surprising, Saber was even more surprised at Maya's reaction. Maya must already have known the extent of her injuries. She must have fully understood that she was on the verge of death. But compared to her own life, the silent assistant to an assassin cared more for the safety of the kidnapped Irisfield and was urging Saber to consider making Irisfield's safety the priority. Just as she was about to ask a question and reply, Saber suddenly understood. This woman was also a knight. Though different from her own proud expressions, this courage to abandon life for the duty she had taken up was precisely the chivalry that Saber so firmly believed in. I must protect Irisfield in the underground storage until the last moment. Maya had certainly already made an oath to Kiritsugu and Irisfield bore to entrust Saber with that promise she could not carry out to the end. She was willing to lose her own life.
It's all right. Very soon, Kiritsugu will come. So, you must, quickly.
Saber gritted her teeth and shut her eyes. Logically thinking, every minute and every second Saber wasted on worrying about Maya was time in which the abducted Irisfield could be moving toward a hopeless situation. The threat of hope that Maya could be saved by Kiritsugu, who would quickly rush here, still remained. But the fate of Irisfield, who had been taken away, had no guarantee if Saber did not give chase immediately. According to the marks left behind in the underground storage, it was undoubtedly a servant's doing. The follow-up attack could only be carried out by another servant, and that meant Saber. Maya nodded and shut her eyes as if reassured. Saber made a new vow to continue Maya's own. There was no reason to hesitate further. Since it was a Godspeed instantaneous transfer caused by a command seal, surely the attacker must not have left here very long ago. The enemy had not yet gone far. Even if she was unable to sense his presence, it was still possible to find him by sight alone. Saber stood on the rooftop and scanned the surroundings with the supernatural vision of a servant. She effortlessly caught sight of the enemy, a distance of about half a kilometer, majestically standing on the roof of what looked like an apartment building of the business district. A robust physique, curly, flame-colored hair, and a crimson mantle. It was undoubtedly Ryder, King of Conquerors Alexander, whom she had met many times before on the battlefield. Saber still held a strand of suspicion regarding Maya's eyewitness statement, that the King of Conquerors, whose name had been unyielding all this time, would employ such base methods. It was indeed difficult to believe. But his thick-set hands were indeed holding up the unconscious form of Irisfeel. The sight left no room for doubt. Though it was yet unknown how they had guessed Saber's new stronghold, this was undoubtedly the Ryder who had just now ambushed Maya and critically injured her. Ryder showed himself openly as if luring the enemy to venture deep. He immediately turned and vanished to one side of the edifice immediately after meeting Saber's gaze. Saber took her stance and intended to continue pursuit, but her adversary was a heroic spirit of the Ryder-class. Saber could not help but purse her lips. It would be easy to continue like this, leaping through the streets in pursuit. But that was assuming the other party was also traveling on foot like she was. If Ryder fled on his Gordius wheel, Saber would not be able to catch up no matter how fast her pace was. But Saber also had the skill of riding. Against a noble phantasm that could fly through the air to reach its destination, it was necessary to also utilize a long-distance cruiser that could surpass the mechanical energy of walking. In the past, Saber would definitely have given up pursuit for lack of a way to catch up. But for better or for worse, the previous day, Maya had given her a new steed. With a deep gratitude to Kiritsugu's foresight and meticulousness in preparing for every eventuality, Saber leaped to the horse, removing the prana armor that would only hinder her riding, and mounted the steed parked in the abandoned courtyard. Not knowing what to say to her, Kiritsugu bit his lip in confusion. Words of gratitude or comfort have no real effect. If he were to say anything with meaning to her at this moment, it would be to tell her the conclusion, "You will die here." Tell her that she has no tasks left, no need to be troubled anymore. If he simply regarded her as a tool to be used, Kiritsugu would definitely be able to say those things. However, no sound could come out of his dry throat. He just stood there dazedly, his lips spasming.
No, you can't cry.
Kiritsugu didn't notice the tears welling up in his eyes, threatening to fall out of the corners until Maya pointed them out.
You need to save your tears for Madam if you cry here. No, you are really weak. If you start to cry now. No way.
He must have made some fatal error. Kiritsugu only felt that acutely now, functioning as a tool, thinking that even such a fate was acceptable at the end, just as Amiya Kiritsugu had always done. He had always thought the same of Isa Maya. However, towards such a Kiritsugu, she spoke these words. Shouldn't there have been other ways for her to live or die?
This morning, you finally returned to the Kiritsugu of the past. If you waver over such a small matter. No.
True. At the same place, he had embraced a different woman and understood the path he should walk in his life. Just a moment's wavering could overturn his belief. The correct method could achieve an impossible miracle. He reminded himself thus. It had been only half a day.
Maya, rest assured.
Kiritsugu said in a suppressed voice as he stared into Maya's eyes, which were gradually losing their light.
Trust Saber with everything. Maya, your task is complete.
Although she had lost her value, the machine that was Amiya Kiritsugu still needed to keep functioning without error. Kiritsugu promised her that. So there was no need for her to keep holding on. No need to keep suffering pain. No need to keep thinking. She could let everything go. Hearing this incompatibly cold declaration, Maya softly nodded her head.
Maya.
No reply. No words of correction or refusal would ever be voiced again. What lay in Kiritsugu's arms was already an ice-cold corpse. It would be better if she could predict his destination as soon as she spotted Gordius' wheel and get there before him, Rather than a competition of driving skills, this was in fact a test of the pursuer's sensitivity and hunting skills. Everyone on the road was staring at this roaming VMAX that kept overtaking vehicles before it with a stunning speed. Saber completely ignored their looks and focused all of her concentration on the nemesis above her. She could detect obstacles blocking her path through changes in airflow. She wouldn't hit anything even if she closed her eyes. Saber roared loudly in the bellowing wind and opened the throttle valves even wider. The speedometer was already over 300 kilometers per hour, and it was still increasing slowly. The brilliance of the floodlights no longer seemed like a light that belonged to the ground. It could almost illuminate the sky.
Ryder, hey, she couldn't have caught up with us, right?
Waver was the first to notice the situation and pointed under the driver's seat with his hand. Ryder gave a downward glance towards the direction his master was pointing at and lifted his eyebrows, rather surprised.
That's a motorcycle?
Waver's sight only registered it as a bright dot. That didn't seem like the kind of motorcycle speed he could comprehend with his normal logic, even if he exhausted his entire brain.
No, that's impossible. However, it is definitely possible through Saber's skills. If we think this way, then perhaps...
Ryder gave off a ferocious smile as if satisfied. Ryder grasped the divine bull's reins and suddenly slowed the war chariot's speed.
Hey! Are we landing?
Waver originally wanted to complain about why he would want to give away his positional advantage in the sky and fall into Saber's trap. However, Waver remembered the power of Excalibur he had seen the day before yesterday. Based on the characteristics of Saber's noble phantasm, the further away they were from her, the more dangerous it would get. It would probably be safer to have a close-range melee battle that could limit the destructive power of the enemy's noble phantasm.
All right, then that's decided. You should be careful.
Fortunately, there were no ordinary vehicles on the national highway at the moment. Although the meandering tarmac mountain road wasn't very suitable for battle, they didn't need to worry about hurting innocent bystanders. Gordius Wheel finally landed 200 meters in front of Saber, who was coming nearer and nearer, and proudly proceeded on the road to prepare for the ensuing attack from its challenger. From a building far away, 3 pairs of eyes watched Ryder's flying noble phantasm as it appeared in the airspace above Shinto City, as well as Saber as she changed her route to pursue him. One person's eyes expressed satisfaction, one pair of eyes was extremely fatigued, and one more person dashed could those eyes filled with violent frenzy still be said to belong to a human?
I did not think that the real Ryder would actually appear. This is truly a good show. Matu Karia, you often bring luck to your companions on the battlefield.
Kodomine Kairi said this with a smile, in a tone that held a slight insinuation of sarcasm. At the same time, he slapped Karia's shoulder to indicate admiration. Karia's good right eye regarded him with suspicion.
Father, do you think it was worth wasting 2 command spells on such a small matter?
Karia looked at his right hand, which was missing 2 command spells, with some dissatisfaction. Karai said to him, smiling,
There is no need to worry. Karia, as long as you are willing to help me, you need not worry about wasting command spells. Come, stretch out your hand.
Kairi caught hold of Karia's veined and withered right hand, softly chanting a holy word while tracing the mark of the command spells with his own hand. At his small ministration, the darkened command spells immediately regained their light and returned to the previous shape of 3 marks.
You... really?
Did I not already tell you? Karia, I accepted the duty of supervisor, so I have the right to redistribute the command spells in safekeeping of the church at will.
Karia was unable to surmise the other's true intentions. He regarded Karai unabashedly, then glanced with a sigh at his own servant. The large silhouette standing behind him was Ryder, King of Conquerors, Alexander. Whether it was the crimson mantle or the curly red hair or the burly physique, everything was the same as the driver of the chariot that had sped out of Fuyuki City with Saber. The only difference was the pair of eerie, blood-red eyes radiating resentment. Undoubtedly, this was a characteristic unique to a mad-enhanced servant. Wrapped in his thick-set arms was the slender body of Iris Fiel, who had lost consciousness and was still in a coma. This Ryder was the true culprit who had kidnapped the guardian of the Holy Grail from the underground storage that Maya protected, and had also lured Saber to give chase toward Shinto.
That is enough, Berserker.
Karia nodded. The large body of the King of Conquerors turned into a pitch-black fog as if burnt, then reverted to the armored figure filled with an ominous air. The dark energy that imitated Ryder's appearance twined about his hands and legs, obscuring small parts of the black armor. Seeing Berserker return to his original form, Kirei said as if groaning,
This sort of transformation ability, it is truly wasted as a noble phantasm of Berserker's level.
This guy initially had the ability to transform into many other heroic spirits that had won merit in military exploits for other people. Because of the mad enhancement, it has been reduced to the ability of imitation.
The black fog that twined about Berserker's entire body was originally a noble phantasm that had the purpose of not only hiding his visage, but also of mimicking any person in order to deceive enemies' ears and eyes. Ever since Berserker had been stripped of his rationality, this ability could not be brought into play. Karia had forced this ability to manifest through the power of the command spells and made it possible to disguise Berserker as a fake rider. But this ability could only be used once. Berserker stared after the light of Saber's motorcycle headlights, moving gradually further away into the east, his gaze full of hatred. A bone-deep hatred caused his shoulders to shake ceaselessly, the armor chafing with a creaking sound, but he did not do anything else out of the ordinary. That was due to the binding of the ultimate command, the second command spell that Korea had used, Capture Irisveal and let Saber escape. In order to make Berserker, who had an unusual stubbornness when it came to Saber, follow his own instruction, it was necessary to restrict him with a forceful command. For Berserker, it appeared that those shackles were extremely difficult to endure. Although his task was now complete, the Black Knight seemed like a mechanical part that had malfunctioned. His limbs continuously convulsed, stubbornly resisting this command. Korea felt a chill run down his back at Berserker's willfulness. As Berserker fell into a state of uncontrollability, Korea forcefully cut off the prana connection with him. Having lost the prana that sustained his form in this world, the servant immediately reverted to spirit form, and the body of Irisveal, losing its support, was violently thrown to the rooftop floor. On impact, the sleeping homunculus gave a soft groan of pain, but nevertheless did not open her eyes. Since being forcefully kidnapped from the magic circle in which she had rested, Irisveal's awareness had become even thinner.
Is this woman really the vessel of the Holy Grail?
To be precise, it is this homunculus. If one or two more servants are finished, then it will probably show its true form. I will prepare the ritual to receive the grail as it descends. Until that time, let this woman also be temporarily under my protection.
The robed man picked up the weak body of the woman. Karia wordlessly communicated his question with his eyes. Kairi noticed his gaze and replied as before with a leisurely and self-satisfied smile.
Don't worry, I will give you the grail as per our agreement, because I have no need to pursue that wish-granting machine.
Before that, you seem to also have promised me another thing, Father.
Ah, that thing. Of course there is no problem. You just have to come to the church tonight at midnight. I will make the preparation for you to meet Tasaka Tokyomi then. It will be too suspicious if both of us appear at the same time. Karia, why don't you go back first?
And you.
I still have some small things to do. Don't forget, Karia. Tonight at midnight, your wish shall be accomplished there.
The priest seemed to be even more concerned over the whole affair than Korea himself, reminding Korea again in a voice filled with anticipation. Korea once again regarded his smile with a suspicious gaze, then slowly turned around and walked toward the rooftop staircase. Without the slightest carelessness, Kodomen Kairi listened closely to his ally's footsteps moving into the distance. After confirming that the sound of footsteps had entirely disappeared, he again moved to a corner of the rooftop and shifted his gaze to a pile of discarded material covered by many sheets of water-resistant material.
I have already sent him away. I don't know who you are, but isn't it about time you revealed yourself?
This voice carried an authority that did not permit compromise. After a period of silence, a hair-raising and suppressed laughter rang out, seeping into the icy night air.
Oh, already noticed, have you? Indeed, you are worthy of being an executor who has experienced battle. Much more sensitive than that kid Karia.
From the darkness appeared a shadow without definite form. At first glance, Kira had even thought that it was a large pile of worms, a collection that would send a chill through anyone. But the bright moonlight immediately chased away this misconception. It was an old man, thin and small of stature, that quietly walked out.
Executor, you have no need to worry. I am not your enemy. I am the kin of that kid who is cooperating with you.
Since he named himself thus, in Kairei's heart surfaced a suitable person.
Matuzoken, is it not?
Indeed. You even know my name. It seems that Tosaka instructs his disciples well.
The old magus quirked a corner of the lips, deeply hidden in wrinkles, revealing an inhuman smile. There would be nothing more to say if she were to decelerate in consideration of the vehicle's burden, but if it were necessary to force the motorcycle to continue at its high speed, this vehicle would fall apart within a few minutes. If no measures were taken to strengthen the innate capability of the vehicle, Saber herself had difficulty judging the feasibility of the plan that had momentarily flashed into her mind, but there was no way to hesitate further. Saber made up her mind and entrusted everything to all the possibilities that had been given to her as a servant. The full-body platinum armor that she wore while fighting, she now intended not to put the armor on her own body, but to fuse it with the body of the VMAX through intense psychokinesis. The concept was similar to the armor that protected beloved horses on the battlefield. With the sense of unity of riding as the mainstay, this time she must definitely turn the steel beast that could not speak into her own limbs. Her prana continuously being released, the various important parts of the VMAX that could ensure maximum speed of movement were completely covered and protected. The flexible and strong armor increased the capability of the motorcycle. Though this usage was unexpected, Saber's great skill made this difficult task possible. The entire structure of the VMAX was wrapped in brand new silver armor, beautiful and majestic to behold. This hard structure of the vehicle was in no way inferior to that monstrous, extraordinarily strong horsepower. This time, the mechanical lion had finally become a real magical beast. The exhaust pipe thundered. Saber released the invisible air like an arrow directly in front of her, completely covering the body of the vehicle. Using the compression of the pneumatic umbrella to decrease air resistance to zero, the VMAX was finally released from air resistance. The needle of the speedometer was already damaged and could not be used. Saber's prana had caused the rushing vehicle to transcend the laws of physics. Already the speed was more than 400 kilometers per hour. The pressure released by the Magecraft pressed the rear wheel firmly against the cement. Even when making turns, Saber did not release the throttle and turned the body of the vehicle round by force. Like this, it might even be possible it made Saber extremely excited to have captured this thread of victory through so much effort. The distance from the Gordius wheel in front gradually shortened. Originally, it had looked like only a point of light, but now it was already possible to clearly see the entire likeness of the thundering vehicle that was releasing lightning bolts and also turning at high speeds. On the other side, Waver, who had been sitting in the charioteer seat since having touched down, was constantly watching the rear. Seeing the brilliance from the headlights of the motorcycle that was suddenly approaching, he could not help but hold his breath. He tugged at Ryder's cape.
Ryder, at this rate, they will catch up to us. Ah, idiot. Look out behind.
Hearing Waver's frantic voice, Ryder snorted. As a heroic spirit who had appeared in this world and gained the throne of Ryder, even without turning back, he could clearly feel the presence of Saber gradually closing in. Ryder roared, the corner of his lips twisting, showing the smile that had always seemed somewhat sinister. Then Ryder slid the enormous structure of the car to the side, arriving at the side of the road. On the two sides of Gordius' wheel, whose dimensions were greater than an ordinary truck, were fixed two large, fiercely curved sickles. On the two sides of the national highway on which Ryder was now speeding were dense forests that almost covered the path. If the wheels of the chariot were moved to the very edge of the paved road, then the blade of the sickle would definitely pass into the lush green forest. The electrified wheels of the chariot crushed the forest as easily as if it were cutting through paper. Ryder had begun a brutal deforestation, though the tree trunks were all very thick. For the sharp sickles flying at 400 kilometers an hour, it was as easy as sawing wood. The tree trunks that had been instantaneously broken all snapped back and were swept into the air. The sight was like shredding wood shavings, only it was a nightmare a few hundred times more majestic. Seeing this tremendous scene of destruction, Saber could not help but hold her breath. The trees that had been swept up into the air descended like rain upon their target, which was obviously the head of Saber who was catching up from behind. To say nothing of being directly hit at this speed, even if the steering wheel should be gently brushed across, it would be a matter of life and death. Deceleration was impossible. This was not a test that could be avoided just by retreating. The only path of survival was to rush on forward. Saber made up her mind. After making thorough mental preparation, she rushed into the rain of continuously falling trees without any timidity whatsoever. These things fell toward the ground like an avalanche. The VMAX advanced forward in a twisting manner like a snake, passing through narrow spaces. Saber thought that braking to make the motorcycle stop was an act of stupidity. So not only did she not decelerate, she also made use of the momentum from acceleration to make the front wheel leave the ground, relying only on the rear wheel to maintain balance and performing the consummate stunt of controlling the driving of a motorcycle using Magecraft alone. That beautiful one-wheeled dance incited Waver to stare, completely forgetting his fear. On Ryder's face also appeared a very satisfied smile. Laughing, Ryder continued to deftly slide the chariot from side to side, closing in on the next object to be cut down. The next prey of the sickles was surprisingly the solid asphalt and concrete that covered the surface of the road. Rock had a density and hardness much greater than tree trunks, but the sickles nevertheless mercilessly crushed them to rubble, sending them flying in all directions like droplets, blocking Saber's way. A fatal baptism of rocks much more lethal than tree trunks. But Saber stared ahead, moving forward bravely, the corners of her mouth suddenly showing an undefeatable smile. Rocks were more dangerous than tree trunks only when first assuming that they must hit. If she could dodge it all, then it would make no difference even if it were raining rockets or bullets. Saber entrusted the last hope of victory to the VMAX, which she completely trusted, using valiant and yet beautifully skilled riding ability to pass through the gaps between the stone and concrete. On the other side, sweeping the surface of the road with its large sickles, Ryder's war chariot had already lost its ability to accelerate. The concrete was much more difficult to cut through than tree trunks and was an obstructing force to the divine bulls, one that could not be overlooked. Saber's sixth sense predicted the arrival of a divine opportunity for victory. From then on, the priority was to pass through the next few successive tests safe and unharmed. There would definitely be a chance to rise again from death. A large concrete slab that had broken off the surface of the road obstructed the path of the VMAX. The large flat stone slab, measuring more than 2 meters in both length and breadth, was just like a stone screen. Facing the blocked path right ahead of her, Saber's gaze was unwavering. Driving the VMAX forward, she raised invisible air over the edge. Along with her roar, the clump of air pressure which had the momentum to sweep away an army of thousands and was supported by the release of prana, impacted heavily on the top of the stone slab. The slab, which looked as if it must weigh at least several tons, was easily flung into the air. It completely defied the laws of physics that the slender wrist of a young girl could carry out such a grand feat. This was the godly skill transcending normalcy that only a servant could possess. Spinning rapidly in midair, the stone slab fell forward along the fatal parabola, aligned exactly with the top of the war chariot in front. Hearing Waver's terrible scream, Ryder turned his head. Raising his sword, he stared wide-eyed at the rock over his head. As if saying in a competition of strength, I will definitely not lose to you, Ryder boldly brandished the bronze sword level with the stone slab. The slab's trajectory was once again changed, spinning even more wildly in midair. At last it fell down like a boomerang, embedding itself deeply in the surface of the road behind the chariot. Seeing this scene, Saber's entire body was electrified by a revelation. The concrete slab embedded into the asphalt road surface, the smooth side facing the sky. It was embedded diagonally into the ground at an angle of slightly more than 30 degrees. It was like a key that foretold the presence of victory. Invisible air, which had been lifted as if she gambled everything with this one blow, slowed slightly with hesitation at that time. Ryder raised his own blade to block. The blades that clashed together, considering only power, Saber should have had a greater chance of victory due to the advantage of her position. However, the outcome was an even match. Invisible air could not break past Ryder's defenses, and had at last been deflected away. There was no opportunity for the swords to clash again, not between Gordius Wheel and the VMAX which had fallen. Saber let off the speed that had been increased by the instantaneous prana release, sustaining the balance of the vehicle in midair only with great difficulty. As the rear wheel touched the ground, all the force of impact was absorbed by the rubber tire and suspension. Thus was an excellent opportunity to seize victory lost in vain. But Saber's unease was for another reason. Hey, Ryder. As if seeing through Waver's doubt, Ryder surfaced an irrepressible smile. Nevertheless, his gaze never shifted from Saber as he said to the youth beside him. Because he knew the haughty personality of this servant, he could understand his intention. A rational master would definitely use the power of the command spell to stop him. The servant himself knew this well too, but he wished to act recklessly anyway. Was this the case?
Are you really going to initiate the attack? From this angle? Rush straight over?
Waver's expression changed drastically. He began to recalculate the distance between both sides. It would be just in time. This was so alarmingly dangerous. Comparing the time he remembered it would take Saber to activate her Noble Phantasm and the acceleration power of Ryder's Noble Phantasm. No matter what angle he looked at it, it was very difficult to guess at the final result. The distance across which the two confronted each other was really very opportune.
How sure are you of victory?
The King of Conquerors replied with a dignified air in a tone that was nevertheless very relaxed. To one who managed military affairs, this statistic was not in fact very optimistic. If the chance of victory was half, then the chance of failure was also half. It was as absurd as flipping a coin to decide between life and death. This sort of thing was definitely not worth being called a strategy. If one absolutely had to name it something, then it could only be called the stratagem of gambling with one's life. Only under conditions in which there was no other way out would one adopt such foolish action.
Why do you want to act irresponsibly like this?
The servant said softly, showing a somewhat sinister smile. His eyes were filled with the belief in victory, while gazing fixedly upon an uncertain future of which he was only 50% assured. Waver furrowed his brow. He could only sigh. There were truly no words that could be said. In the end, it was only thus. Compared to the war centered around the Holy Grail, they placed even greater importance on the open and above-board competition between themselves as heroic spirits.
You want to win against Saber so much that you are willing to do something like this?
Ryder nodded his head without the slightest hesitation. This despot had defeated countless nobility and war generals. Ignoring their power and wealth, he had obtained their souls. It was for this reason that people called him the King of Conquerors. He did not eliminate the enemy, nor belittle them. He subdued a standing opponent. This was what he thought was the true form of victory. What right had one who relied only on the Grail to connect and establish a contract to be concerned with whether this was right or wrong?
Forget it, Ryder. If you can win by your methods, then that's okay too. Waver had given up. Exhaling frustratedly, he threw out such a sentence. This was not a case of sending the helve after the hatchet. To Ryder, whose prana had been replenished through a day of rest, this was an excellent opportunity to make a challenge. It was an opportunity that would definitely not come again. No one could guarantee that the next time he confronted Saber, his physical condition would be better than this. In that case, instead of believing in a statistical chance of victory, it was better to place his bet on Ryder's fighting spirit. Compared to attempting to convince the King of Conquerors through logical reasoning, it was better to let him do things on his own grounds. It was precisely that transcendent personality that was afraid of neither heaven nor earth that perhaps formed a chance of victory one could believe in. Waver's expression was serious, as if having said these many reasons in order to convince himself. Ryder maintained a confident smile. His confidence was not hollow. Though he had said that it was a large gamble, Ryder himself had full confidence in his victory. The true name of that which had finally been released, the chariot drawn by divine bulls from which lightning suddenly burst forth, the majestic braying of the divine bulls under whose feet Berserker had been trampled in the first battle could never compare to this. Seeing her opponent rush towards her, Saber also hurriedly pulled out her sword under the protection of the air pressure. Opening the vortex of the hurricane, a golden light shone forth as if to show the kingship of the night. Prana was continuously roiling. Accompanying Ryder's roar, the bulls stamped hard once on the asphalt ground. Their cloven hooves rushed forward like raging billows. Waver, though overwhelmed by their majesty, nevertheless made an utmost effort to open his eyes wide, so as not to pass out again like the last time. At the fore was a very strong anti-city noble phantasm about to be released. In order to gain the initiative, Ryder rushed as if his life depended on it, definitely unwilling to give up an opportunity to defeat Saber. The King of Conquerors' direct attack sent a shiver down Saber's spine. By the rushing of the divine bulls, the 100-meter distance had instantaneously been decreased to 0. In the blink of an eye, the might of Gordius' wheel manifested before her eyes. If the hilt of her precious sword had still been in her hand, then she would definitely have been certain of victory. Facing the golden radiance that Ryder raised, there was only one thing that she could shout out, one true name. In the moment that the rushing incarnation of thunder was about to trample upon Saber's small frame, golden lightning, as if radiating countless comets, made the night as bright as day. Waver's gaze was drawn by this, dazzled by this, and he could not help but turn around within the intense attack. He rationalized extremely calmly and realized one thing. He had personally witnessed the light of Saber's noble phantasm, and that meant... The result was that, before the Gordius wheel had reached its final step, the King of Knights had taken the first step to initiate her attack. But even thus, the touch of the thick-set arm that extended all the way to his shoulder nevertheless did not disappear. To be aware of one's own defeat at the same time indicated the truth that one was still alive and clear-headedly conscious. Waver gingerly opened his eyes and saw the appalling condition of the battlefield. Due to Excalibur's blow, the surface of the road had instantly been burned away. Even the forest a little way away had been instantly blown to waste. The road was scarred, carved in the likeness of a single straight line. The molten asphalt gave off a revolting stench. It was extremely pungent. Waver felt as if his body was floating through the universe. No, carried by a strong man on his shoulders. Who was it that carried his young master like a small luggage bag? It was not necessary to ask to know. Ryder said softly, as if remorseful from the heart. But considering the current situation, it did seem like too much of an understatement. It appeared that Ryder was not hurt either, but the chariot in which he rode, as well as the two divine bulls, had all vanished without a trace.
The noble phantasm Gordius Wheel had borne the might of the sword of promised victory, and so had, like Caster sea monster, vanished and left no trace, not even a speck of dust. In the moment at which he had bordered the line of death, Ryder, who had understood his failure, had quickly plucked Waver from the charioteer's seat and narrowly escaped from under the attack of the anti-city noble phantasm. It could really be said that the two had cheated death. But the price was high enough. The flying chariot, which Ryder had used as his main weapon all this time, had at the last minute gone up in smoke. But this was not yet overusing his will to fight. Waver immediately chased away his frustration at failure. Even if the Gordius Wheel had been taken away, the King of Conquerors still had one last real trump card.
Ryder, use Ionian heteroi.
Toward Waver, who spoke thus, Ryder lightly but very firmly shook his head. The King of Conquerors seemed to not yet intend to dismiss his foresight regarding the latter half of the war, which he had come up with while resting. If Saber was his opponent, it was best to use the chariot. As for the summoning of the heteroi, which could only be activated once, it was necessary to save it for the showdown with Archer later. But no matter how physically strong and unwilling to admit defeat Ryder was, to engage in a battle of blades without mechanical force was clearly a definitively advantageous position for Saber. Though the build of the two were vastly different, this was a battle between servants that transcended normalcy. Though Saber looked weak, she had a monstrous fighting ability. From the battles so far, Waver had long since become aware of this. Very obviously, Ryder understood her strength well, but the King of Conquerors still did not look at all afraid. He confronted Saber open and above board by raising his sword, without the slightest indication of retreat. In this closely matched staring competition, it was Saber who lost first. She slid the sword wrapped in windstorms back into its sheath, then released the throttle and slid the rear wheel around to turn the vehicle, speeding away with her back to Ryder. Saber did not show off her weakness to Ryder at all. At the same time she was moving the rear wheel, she also quickly accelerated, leaving behind only a tremendous roar of exhaust and moving quickly in the direction of Fuyuki City in one breath. In the blink of an eye, she had disappeared from sight, leaving only the roar of a motorcycle that was moving away. Waver and Ryder stood there stupefied, listening to the sound of the motorcycle. Ryder, who had been listening intensely to the sound of the exhaust, nodded, showing a knowing expression.
You, after being defeated, this is really the first thing you have to say?
In the aftermath of battle, all the strength had drained out of Waver's body. Angrily questioning Ryder, he suddenly became aware of an important problem and became dismayed.
Hey, Ryder, how are we ever going to get back?
Yeah. In the darkness, Waver gazed upon Shinto, which shone with light in the distance, and sighed heavily. Mato Zoken, the man before him, was the mastermind behind the Mato family, a presence known but never seen. Kodamine Carey's senses couldn't help but go on the alert. There was a small, short figure that had deliberately chosen to stand in a dark corner of the night street, a place that bright lights could not illuminate. Contrary to his shriveled and aged appearance, this man was an extremely dangerous entity. Tokiomi had told Kaire time after time. Although he had publicly declared that he was retired and no longer cared for the businesses of the outside world, he was an abnormality that covertly used the secret arts of magecraft to prolong his life and rule over the Mato house for generations. In a way, he was far more dangerous than the actual master of the family, Karia. This old man was someone who required special attention.
Kotamin, Kaire, I heard that you're the son of that stubborn and honest Rise. Is that so?
That is true.
Kaire nodded to show agreement when he heard the question asked by this hoarse voice.
What a surprise. It is often said that heroes come from the most unexpected places. There must be some truth to it. I didn't think that man could sire a son as wily and deceitful as you.
What do you want, Mato Zoken?
Kaire ignored the old magus's provocation and demanded an answer.
You should be on Karia's side, so why did you have to hide here and eavesdrop on us?
He deliberately pretended to smile like a doting grandfather, but that skeletal, shriveled countenance was markedly different from that of normal humans. It was obvious that his face with such a structure would never have such a smile.
I heard everything you said to Karia to appease him. You seem to want to get rid of the son of the Tosaka house.
That is true. That man killed my father.
Be quiet. Don't repeat such a lie twice.
Those deep-set eyes, buried in wrinkles, glistened with a keen light and stared at Carrie.
Kotamin, Kere, you've gone too far with your petty trickery. You even dared to act behind Tosaka's back. You've overstepped your boundaries. You don't need Carrier's hand to kill Tokiomi at all. Not since the moment you decided to get rid of him. You must have prepared for every eventuality. I'm not so old that I'm turning senile. You might be able to trick Carrier, but don't you dare think you can trick me, too.
Kinmere quietly improved his evaluation of this old magus in his mind, but he maintained his mask of calm.
Your Go isn't the son of the Tosaka house, but Carrier himself, isn't it?
If you doubt me so, then why didn't you stop Korea?
A bone-chilling creaking sound, like the muted chirping of a horde of insects, resonated. Kairei only understood it to be the sound of this old man's suppressed laughter after a few moments.
How should I say this? You can say it is simply out of my curiosity. I want to see what methods you would use to break Carrier. I am very interested in this.
Zoken, can you really watch Karya, who is fighting for the Mado House, have his chances of victory destroyed little by little?
Chances of victory? Carrier? Such things never existed. If that piece of trash can obtain the Holy Grail, then the past 3 bouts of slaughter would all seem like a comedy show.
I don't quite understand. Isn't the Mado House also one of the 3 noble families at the beginning? One that craves the Holy Grail?
Hearing Kairei's question, Zoken gave a cold snort.
I think the Tosaka son and those of the Einsburn house are all idiots. If they remember the details from the last battle of the previous war, then they should understand that there is something odd with this fourth heaven sphere and be alert towards it. I saw through the battles of this round from the start. Truth be told, just by looking at the despicable caster at the start of the war, we should have been able to tell that the summoning didn't call forth a heroic spirit, but an evil spirit, far removed from heroes. Without a doubt, something has begun to err within the heavens field system. We need to solve this problem first.
This odd man, who had overcome ordinary humanity, had likely been present in every single heavens feel. This man, Mado Zoken, had grasped something that even the previous supervisor, Kotomin Raizei, had not known about.
Then why did you let Karya and Berserker participate? If you only wanted to watch from the sidelines, then why did you even prepare a servant?
That's not the reason. Although there were some dubious elements, it is still a grand ceremony held every 60 years, after all. It wouldn't have been interesting to watch the children fumble around. Therefore, I found a unique method for me to enjoy the event.
Zoken said with a tone of ridicule. His mouth tilted even more, and there were smiles all over his face.
Of course, if that failure really grabbed the Grail, then there's no better outcome. Despite what I say, I really am impatient. Just seeing how Karya, who betrayed me, suffers in pain day by day, I honestly can't get enough of it. I desire the Mato House's victory, but I'm also tempted by the thought of observing Karya's defeated and helpless end. How conflicted I am.
Zoken's hoarse laughter was truly piercing to Kairei's ears. How much better would it have been had they met on the battlefield and fought for their lives not with words, but with swords? He could not help thinking that even though he knew the other was a very dangerous old magus, it seemed that Kairei already found the existence of Mado Zoken to be unbearable. Faced with the inquisition from Kairei, who was trying his best to hide the true feelings in his heart, Zoken lifted his eyebrows as if deliberately mocking the other man.
How surprising. I thought you would have been able to understand my joy.
What did you say?
I may look old, Kotomin Kere, but my nose is still very sensitive. You have the same smell as I do. You're like a maggot that crawled here, attracted by the piece of rotting meat that Karya is.
Kirei remained quiet, but slowly drew out his black keys from within his frock. He now knew he could no longer persuade this old magus with reason. But they must fight to the death. Zoken had stepped into his range. He had entered the absolute territory at the risk of his life. If he wanted to ensure his vitals remained safe, he could only use a killing strike, attacking the enemy head-on without any warning. If Zoken had thought of evading that strike at his vitals, an inevitably certain kill, Kairei would have no other choice but to confront him directly. Right now, Mado Zoken had already crossed this line, not with his feet, but with his words. However, Zoken still faced the cold-killing intent emanating from Kairi with a casual smile.
Did I overestimate you? I thought I'd finally managed to find a kindred spirit. It seems you still feel ashamed of your own heresy. You're still too inexperienced. Do you feel ashamed of these matters, such as a man would feel shame in indulging in self-pleasure?
There were no shows of strength, nor were there any warnings. Kairi simultaneously threw out 2 black keys at his left and his right in the blink of an eye, so fast that his preparatory movements couldn't even be seen. It was as if he was going to pierce this old man's body like a piece of barbecue meat. However, faced with those blades, Zoken remained completely unmoved. He was extremely nonchalant, and it was no empty boast. The silhouette of the old magus melted like mud, moments before the 2 blades were about to pierce him through, and he once again became a shapeless shadow hiding in the corner. Kairi's entire body tensed up. A voice full of happy mockery sounded from somewhere.
Ah, scary, scary. You are young, but still a hound of the church. It'll definitely endanger my life if I mock you.
Kairi took up another black key and stared at the throbbing shadow in the darkness. Was it an illusion a moment ago, when he saw that he was just about to pierce Mato Zoken's flesh? Or was it that Mato Zoken's physical body didn't even exist here? Any kind of extraordinary thing was possible when it came to this wily and devious old magus. If such trivial matters surprised Kairi, then he would not be suited to the role of executor.
Honestly, until next time, young man. You must nurture your personality so that you can be on equal footing with me the next time we meet.
Zoken's scent melted into the darkness and disappeared, leaving only a terrifying, shrieking laughter. All that was left was the figure of Kiri, who stood holding his blade like a scarecrow. Irritated, Kairi threw the black key, which had lost its target on the roof. He hadn't imagined that this old man was a monster with no usable potential whatsoever. There was no reason to keep him alive. He was certain that Mato Zoken was a nemesis that he must eliminate sooner or later.
Where is Irisville right now?
Byakuya was convinced that he must answer before he understood the meaning of the question, or else he would be killed. After a moment, he finally realized he actually didn't understand the meaning of this question. Byakuya was instantly crushed by an overwhelming despair. Byakuya moaned unintelligibly. The man stared at him with an ice-cold gaze and slowly took out the weapon from his coat. He roughly jammed Byakuya's right hand between the floor and the muzzle and pressed the trigger. Byakuya's right hand scattered in the wind with a thundering bang that could make anyone who heard it go insane. A part of his body had just disappeared without reason. Byakuya was so shocked that he couldn't speak. After a while, a scarring pain made him scream in agony. It was midnight, but a bright light was still on in the hilltop church, the house of God that promised peace on earth. As he came upon it, a small yet contradictory sentiment stopped Mato Karia in his tracks. The naivety of those humans who easily sought solace at the so-called place of prayer. He sneered at the thought, but at the same time, one could not help but feel sympathy towards them. If one said that every suffering in this world was but a trial of God, then Karia would strangle that God and his disciples to death with his own hands. He was probably driven by that impulsion. One step and then another. Steadily, Karia was getting closer to the Holy Grail. But even faster, the crest worms inside his body kept eating into his life. If he strained his ears, he could almost hear the trilling sound of the worms slurping flesh and blood from his body, the sound of them scraping his bones and feasting on them. To Karia, the pain of the crest worm's slow, continual torture had already become a part of himself, like breath and heartbeat. His consciousness was always cloudy and dim, and if he lost focus, he would be only vaguely aware of the passage of time. He swore never to forgive him as a person. Like water seeping out of a crevice, that thought continued to erode his heart bit by bit. How many more times can I fight later? How many more days will I live? If Karia was trying to gain the Holy Grail and secure Sakura's salvation with his own hands, which was exactly his last wish, he could only wait for a miracle, right? If that was the case, should he pray? From the top of the towering gable roof in front of him, at that cross with its detached gaze, the worms creeping towards the ground. Should he kneel down and pray earnestly?
Stop kidding. Me. Ugh.
He felt like he was being flooded by a humiliating timidity. Scoldingly, Karia rebuked himself. He did not come to the church at a time like this to seek imaginary help. No, it was the exact opposite. This evening, Korea sought the blood of his sworn enemy. If he was to believe Kotoma and Karei's words, then at this moment, the one awaiting Korea's visit at the chapel was none other than Tosaka Tokiomi. He was not here for repentance or worship. Korea was standing in front of the altar now to conclude a vendetta. Kotomi Karei had prepared an unlikely rematch for his previous duel with Tokiomi, the one he had lost. Tonight would probably be his last chance to get back at that loathsome magus. He must not be careless. The pain of his flesh, conflict, and despair, all were burned down to ashes by the flames of hatred that flared up in his heart. Memories of the previous battle, he had not even returned a single attack, further fanned the fury within Kazuya. His mind could only see the instant in which he would destroy Tokiomi, who had snatched Aoi away from him and abandoned Sakura with his own hands. With only that in mind, how near he was to the Holy Grail, the terror of being defeated, all was forgotten. He had completely turned into an automatic, hate-driven machine. With only that in mind, Mato Korea's heart was liberated from all sufferings. His mouth even curved into a smile. There was no longer any fear of letting Berserker loose. With that, he would grab Tokiomi's heart, and he would bathe in the gush of his blood. If he could achieve that, there was nothing he could not afford to lose. He was reduced to such thinking. His shoulders shook like a beast drawing a deep breath. Having arrived at the front gate of the church with killing intent seething from his entire body, Korea slowly pushed the doors open. A candlelight glimmered gently in the center of the chapel. In contrast, the still air was overly peaceful, as if it had frozen. Korea felt a slight sense of unease, like one would feel in a graveyard. Nevertheless, the instant he saw the back of the head of the person sitting in the first row of the congregation seats, he was awash with overwhelming anger.
Tosaka Tokiomi!
It was a shout brimming with killing intent, but there was no reply. Knowing that complete disregard was just like the prideful attitude of the magus, Korea walked in on large strides and closed his distance with Tokiomi.
You want to kill me, Tokiomi? But you're too naive. Until I have my revenge on you, no matter how many times I will—
But with his defenseless back exposed to Korea, Tokiomi still did not show any response. Despite himself, Korea slowed his pace with distrust and caution. He wondered if it was a decoy puppet sitting there to trick Korea. However, from up close he could see the shoulder width, the carefully trimmed, curly and glossy hair, and even the shape of his slightly visible ears. Without a doubt, this was Tosaka. Korea would not be mistaken about the figure of his sworn enemy, which had been burned into his eyes. Korea came to a distance where it could reach out and touch Tokiomi with his hands, and stopped. With hatred and an odd unease and confusion, he gazed at the back of Tokiomi, who had not budged an inch.
Tosaka.
He stretched out his hand. The day before yesterday, defensive fire had stopped all his attacks. Recalling the scorching heat, he instinctively drew his hand back. Even so, he could not resist the impulse to grab Tokiomi's neck, just a few centimeters away, and break it. Finally, the shivering fingertip reached the front of the neck with its stylish tie. With just a light touch, the corpse that had been leaning against the seat lost its balance. The flaccid limbs were like those of a puppet whose strings had been cut, like building blocks tumbling down. Tosaka Tokiomi's ice-cold body collapsed into Karia's arms. At that moment, the confusion and shock that hit Mato Karia was as destructive as a single hammer blow to his head. Like an empty shell, the blank face was unmistakable. Without any room for doubt, it was the countenance of Tosaka Tokiomi. At that point, Korea had no other choice but to accept that Tokiomi was dead. The once scornful, haughty derision, all the intimately cold-hearted and sneering words, all the memories related to Tosaka Tokiomi saturated Korea's thoughts and overwhelmed him. With the existence of Tokiomi as a starting point, the sentiments, motivation, and urge swirling within Korea were all blown off at once.
Why? W-Y.
And then, standing with the soundless corpse in his hands, thunderstruck, Korea was stunned at the size of the hole gaping wide within it. A cavity so large that it caused Mato Karia's countenance to crumble to an unrecognizable appearance. At that moment, for the first time, he realized that he had not considered, much less foreseen, losing his driving factor, his bitter enemy, Tosaka Tokiomi. But this realization was already too late. Uncontrollably shaken, Korea was at a point where he could not even recall basic information like why he had been fighting Tokiomi, or what had he wished for in participating in the War of the Holy Grail. And then, at that moment, until he sensed the presence of the new visitor who had just stepped into the chapel, until he was called from behind by that familiar and lovely voice, Korea had not noticed anything at all. Turning back into stupor, Korea could not grasp at all why Oi Tosaka was still standing there. If his brain had been functioning properly, he probably would have wondered why he was being called by Aoi of all people, and why she had visited this place when there was no reason at all for her to do so. And he probably could have gone even further back in his train of thought to the one person who would have been able to position Tokiomi's body at the chapel beforehand. It had to be a human, and been able to guess without difficulty the identity of the person who had killed Tokiomi. However, at the height of his confusion, in a state where he could not mouth legible words, Kariya could only moan uselessly. The instant he staggered back, the corpse he had been carrying in his arms fell onto the chapel floor with like a sack. Thud. For a long time, Aoi stared at the figure that had once been her husband.
Aoi-san.
Without uttering a syllable, Aoi slowly approached Tokiomi's body, as if being drawn to him, for reasons unknown. Kariya felt overpowered and retreated further, but was obstructed by an obstacle just a few steps later. Rigidly still as if passing judgment unto him, it was the altar of the chapel. Bending her knees to the floor, Aoi lifted Tokiomi's face up. With no place to hide, Kariya could only watch her. He could not understand why Aoi did such a thing. No, he did not want to understand. Why she did not even spare a glance at him, her childhood friend, but continually fixed her eyes on the body of Tokiomi. What the meaning of those tears falling down her face was, Kariya obstinately rejected comprehension, and because of that, he could not utter a single word. If memory served, he was supposed to never make this person, whom he loved above anyone else, cry again, and to fight for her even at the cost of his life. If that was the case, then this woman sobbing in front of him right now, who was she? If he were to accept the answer, wouldn't Mato Kariya fall to pieces? She did not look at Kariya. As if ignoring the air and all else, tears poured out from her to her husband's body. She, the tragic heroine, was exactly at the center of the world, as its axis of revolution. Having regarded her in that way, Kariya was an existence devoid of all meaning, like trash on the stage or a stain in the background. Kariya was terrified of the delusion that his position and his very existence were erased. He even felt the impulse to scream to catch her attention, but not a sound could come out of his dry throat. Nevertheless, before long, when he was looked straight in the eye by Aoi, who had finally lifted her head up, Kariya finally understood. Ignorance was a greater compassion. If he could disappear from the world at that instant, it would be a far greater relief. It was a familiar voice, but in a tone he had never heard before. That was because his gentle and kind childhood friend had never hated or cursed anyone in front of Kariya before. Why must he be blamed? Tokiomi Tosaka was the cause of all the evil. When that man was not around, everything was supposed to turn out well. First of all, why had he died in a place like this? It should have been Kariya asking questions instead.
Why?
However, not even allowing time for Kariya to reply, she asked him back instead. I don't know. With the face just like Aoi's, with a voice just like Aoi's, why was this woman directing such seething enmity and cold-killing intent towards Mato Kariya? Kariya was supposed to have saved Aoi. He was supposed to have obtained a future for her beloved daughter. Then why was he being blamed? Who on earth was this woman?
That guy, it's his fault.
Pointing at Tokiomi's corpse with a shaky hand, Kariya tried to correct Aoi in a loud voice.
If that man would just disappear, no misfortune would befall on anyone. Aoi-san, Sakura-chan, I thought you'd be happy.
With a demonic expression, the woman shouted. With a snap, the decisive cracking sound caused Mato Kariya to collapse.
I
have a person I loved. Someone warm and gentle. Someone whom I want to be happy above everyone else. If it's for her sake, even my life was worth it. Because I felt this way. I had to endure. And to this day, whatever pain or hardships, so being denied with no chance of explaining myself, so for whose sake that I am willing to die for, go to hell, you're lying. The one I love most is without a doubt, certainly
For me, the person I love.
While murmuring with a scraping sound, Kariya's fists tightened. In order to heap denials upon those words that denied his everything, in order to shut her mouth up, he tightly squeezed her throat. The woman opened and closed her mouth, gasping for oxygen like a fish that had left its tank, and yet it seemed to Kariya as if she was trying to form words to further abuse him, which infuriated him all the more. If I don't shut her up, everything will end. Everything I've done to this day will be meaningless. There's no way I can allow that to happen. As a matter of fact, Kariya's madness was the last fortress left to rescue him. In spite of that, he had even missed that lowliest aid at the last moment. The face of the woman rapidly turning deathly pale due to lack of oxygen was too similar to the image of the beloved woman he cherished so much in his heart. At last, Kariya realized that. At the instant both hands loosened up, a sound slipped from Aoi's mouth. Collapsing onto the ground with a thud, she had fainted, not budging an inch. Lacking even the sound judgment to differentiate the living from the dead, Kariya thought that just like Tokiomi, she had died. He gazed at the hands that had just choked Aoi with all their might. Someone more important than anything else. Someone who was the very meaning of his life. Those fingers that had plucked that someone away stiffened like they belonged to someone else. But without a doubt, there was no way to deceive himself. Those fingers belonged to him. Like a peal of thunder, he realized. Those fingers squirming so shakily were just like the crestworms creeping about Sakura's skin. He clawed at his broken face. He tore his dried-up hair. A scream escaped his throat. Whether it was a shriek or a wail, he could not even understand that. Losing the last bit of sense in him, with only his animalistic instinct, Kariya desperately sought to flee. Stumbling, he ran away from the chapel. The man who had lost everything was greeted by the pitch-black darkness of the starless night. Within the chapel of Fuyuki Church, there were secrets known only to the priest. The wall that separated the chapel and the priest's room in the back in reality only served as a partition. It was built with the consideration that all the writings in the chapel went through the priest's room. Therefore, as he relaxed in a chair of the priest's room, Kodomain Kari could hear every development of the tragedy in detail. He seemed deeply immersed in his thoughts. Beside him, the golden servant watching over him asked, silently gazing into space. Kairi gulped down wine from a glass he was holding. It was a mysterious sensation. The plot was just as he imagined and expected. It was performed and recreated relying on human beings in flesh and blood, furnished with souls. There was no surprise at all. Both Mato Kariya and Tosaka Aoi had accepted the roles Kairi conveyed to them, and at the appointed time, they had visited the church and encountered each other with the perfect timing. He had not expected Tokiomi's body, which was just a stage prop, to have the exact effect he desired. Because he had rectified the death spots in the stiffened post-mortem body, theoretically, no one should have been able to perceive that the person had been dead for more than half a day. But if it was a development that betrayed none of his expectations, even if there were supposed to be no surprises, when he watched over it to the end, he felt a peculiar excitement. If it was to be named, it might be called a sense of freshness. The tragic scene just now was not a fantasy performed by actors. It was true the curé had guided the scene, but bearing their innermost feelings, his fellow humans clashed against one another. The radiance of souls scattering the sparks was, without a doubt, authentic. While struggling to decide on an answer to Gilgamesh's question, Curé tasted the fragrance of the wine in his mouth again. Indeed, if it was surprise he was looking for, he was better off looking into this wine.
Why, I drank this before, and yet I did not notice how profound the taste of this wine was.
The King of Heroes smiled at Curé, who gazed at his wineglass, straight-faced.
Oh.
Not knowing the best way to reply to the rapturous Gilgamesh, Kairi put down his empty glass and stood up. He thought about the things he was supposed to attend to later and felt that he could not afford to keep relaxing. Aoi, lying on the chapel floor, would undoubtedly require treatment. And he also had to retrieve the fleeing Kariya for his next course of action. Nevertheless, before leaving the room, Kairi once again glanced at the empty glass. He noticed that he felt reluctant to part with the wine which he had finally finished. Earnestly, he thought, if I can taste such flavor from this wine, I would love to drink it again. Act 15, -25, 4806. The sky was already brightening by the time Waver Velvet returned to the Mackenzie house in Miyama. He had walked for hours on the night footpath. He wouldn't have managed to make it back to town had he not met a taxi on the way. It had been a stroke of luck that an empty taxi was in such a remote location, but he didn't know if he should feel thankful or angry. Fortune should have graced them when Ryder and Waver were in their fiercest moment of battle. He could only feel sad at this untimely luck. Waver let out a long sigh at his prolonged night march when he got out of the taxi. Suddenly, he heard someone call out to him. The voice was coming from above his head. He lifted his head. Old Man Glenn, the patriarch of the family that Waver had assumed was sound asleep, was sitting on the rooftop of the second story and was waving at Waver as he stood at the door.
Grandpa? What are you doing? Something to say to me? Then why are you on the roof?
This kind of strange behavior was enough to make people wonder if he was going senile. To be honest, Waver didn't feel like humoring the old man. He had returned with a tired, shuffling gait after having suffered through the chilly night air. All he wanted right now was to tuck into bed as soon as possible and let his exhausted body have some rest.
Grandpa, can I wait till morning?
Although his tone was placid, Old Man Glenn was quite adamant.
Kid, you better get up there. That old man seems to really want to say something to you.
A rough voice that only Waver could hear said this above his shoulder. Ryder had finally promised to conserve his prana and remained in spiritual form on his return journey after his fight with Saber.
I'll keep an eye out on the surroundings. Don't worry.
It's not a matter of whether I'm worried.
Waver wanted to rebuke, but immediately hushed himself. Old Man Glenn couldn't see a servant in spiritual form. If Waver spoke, it would look like he was muttering to himself oddly.
No one cares about what I think.
At this stage, with the War of the Holy Grail almost at its end, he had to force himself to provide company for this useless old man. Waver couldn't help but feel resentful. However, it would only drag this on for longer if he started to argue. Even if he didn't agree to it, he still didn't know how to respond if he was asked why he was returning in the early hours of the morning. In the end, Waver could only walk towards the roof, where the old man was at. The Mackenzie house differed from the other houses in one way. Its roof had an attic and a skylight. It was easy to climb up to the roof through the skylight if one used the ladder that stretched towards the rooftop attic from the second-story stairway. It had not been made that way by accident. Rather, the house had been designed to enable easy access to the rooftop when from construction. It was easy to get onto the roof if one got used to it. Although it was easy to get up to the roof, he had to endure the frosty winter dawn. Waver, having gotten up from the skylight, shivered in the northern wind. With absolutely nothing around to break the wind, the chill at this height was incomparable to what it had been on ground level. Old Man Glenn said loudly as he poured the steaming liquid out of the thermal flask and into the mug. He was wearing a downcoat and had a few blankets wrapped around him. It seemed the old man had made thorough preparations for the cold. Waver couldn't think of a reason for the old man to do this.
Grandpa, how long have you been sitting here?
Waver didn't reply when he heard those drunken and almost senile words, just drinking his coffee nonchalantly. Glenn had thought of getting up specifically to look at constellations. Did all old men have such leisurely thoughts?
I think so.
Waver gazed out at the scene beneath him as he perfunctorily brushed off these past events that he had no memories of. The entirety of Fuyuki City, from Miyama to the sea, could be seen from the rooftop since the house was grounded at the side of the hill. The air was fresh and crisp, while the dawn dyed the sea with a shade of pearly pink, and he could even detect with his eyes the shadow of sails sailing away to distant lands. It was the entire view of the battlefield for Waver. He had no leisure in his heart to appreciate such beauty. Glenn's gaze, immersed in memory, looked toward the other side of the ocean, his homeland where his departed son resided.
Do you really like Japan that much?
The old man let out a sigh as he recalled those years of loneliness.
Huh?
There was an obvious incongruity in that reminiscence, accompanied with a bitter smile. That made Waver pause. As if mocking him, Old Man Glenn silently shook his head and said, "What injured Waver more than the awkwardness and the sense of crisis was the feeling of humiliation." The subliminal suggestion was removed. Moreover, it was by this gentle old man with no training in magecraft. "Aren't you angry?" Waver asked in a small voice. Old Man Glenn said with a complex but calm expression. Waver came to the conclusion that this old man was completely defenseless and extremely dense. Even the lab rats in the clock tower were smarter than him. Why didn't he hate Waver? Why didn't he blame Waver? For Waver, who only knew the small world of the Mages Association, the old man's leniency was something he couldn't comprehend. Waver couldn't bring himself to look at the old man. He lowered his eyes and looked at his hands. It was a pair of hands that would one day create great mysteries. He had such talent. Even if others refuted him, at the very least he could firmly believe in that possibility within himself. But what did reality say? He couldn't even carry out a hypnotic hint, the most basic art amongst basics, to an outstanding degree. It wasn't a matter of luck or an accident. Those excuses were useless. His magecraft didn't even maintain a satisfactory result when faced with this kind old man who begged him to deceive them a while longer. Had he been that man, he could have obtained his goal while laughing and holding a goblet in his hand. Not only did Waver Velvet's magecraft fail to achieve such a result, he had been indebted to another's gentleness in return. There was a sense of absurdity on top of regret. Yes, he was only a clown, Staring into the empty sky, Waver became oblivious to his surroundings and sank into contemplation. Now he fully understood the mindsets of those in the clock tower who had laughed at him. Waver was laughing at his own stupidity with those people. Although he thought as such, he couldn't actually laugh. Glenn and Martha Mackenzie weren't expecting a comedy. They were making a sincere request to Waver in their own way. Now that he thought about it, this was the first time that he wasn't the subject of ridicule.
I'm sorry. I can't promise you that. I can't even promise I can safely return here next time.
Yes. Saber's noble phantasm and its cold light flashed before his eyes. That had happened half a day ago. Waver would not forget the abyss of death he saw then any time soon. Old Man Glenn was silent for a while, as if in thought. Then he gave a heavy nod. This logic was in contrary to the reason for which Waver gambled his youth. The so-called way of magecraft could only begin once the practitioner became prepared to die. The ultimate state could only be achieved by burning away one's life. That was the direction he had labored towards until this day. With a sense of loss that left him speechless, Waver stared at the dawn. Little did he know that he was greeting the final day of the Fourth War of the Holy Grail. 17 hours, 21 minutes, and 41 seconds. People remembered that day in Fuyuki City to be one of abnormal weather conditions. Unbelievably, the daily north wind suddenly ceased. An intense, midsummer-like sunlight scorched the seemingly stagnant air, resulting in an unseasonable heat haze everywhere. Bafflingly high temperatures and humidity, inexplicable even to weather forecasters, occurred over a very limited region with Fuyuki City at its center, further fueling the premonitions first felt by the clueless townspeople when strange things had first begun to happen. The guerrilla incidents happening one after another in the city. The bizarre, appalling murderers. The disappearance of infants. Not a single clue could be found towards a solution. There was no sign of the night curfew being lifted, and worse still, there had been the incident of the waste processing plant on the Mion River the day before yesterday. With these constantly bizarre incidents grating the nerves of the exhausted people, they could not help but feel that this peculiar weather was an omen of more calamities yet to occur. Prophecy sitting wide awake in the shade of a tree, Amiya Kiritsugu watched as the angle of his shadow slowly changed with the blazing sunlight. More than 40 hours had elapsed since he last slept, but his senses were still tense, never desiring rest. Because he was in a dangerous situation, he had to time his breaks well and maintain a condition at which he could deal with things perfectly in crucial times. This was his experience as a professional fighter, because the forewarning boundary field was already in place in key positions. When someone approached him, he could instantly wake up. If he was in standby mode now, he could enter REM sleep within a few seconds, possibly dealing with his accumulated fatigue as well. However, at this moment, Kiritsugu did not even spare a thought about such established caution. To cut off his feelings and maintain his very best condition was also one of his mechanisms, but under the state of being prepared to be scorched, he was able to surpass his limits and overdrive himself. This was another mechanism. The thing able to convert himself to such operational state was none other than the premonition of settling the score he felt under his skin. Right now, the thing Kiritsugu was anticipating for was by the side of the pond in the back of Rudo Temple, which was situated along the mountainside of Mount Enzo, east of Miyama town of Fuyuki City. After confirming Tokiomi's fallout and Kodamin Kairei's comeback at the Tosaka residence yesterday night, Kiritsugu launched an assault on the Shinto church immediately, but that which was supposed to be his headquarters was already empty. There were signs of humans being there about an hour before, so it was possibly a paper-thin miss. The delays during the invasions of the Matu residence and Tosaka residence had cost him precious time. By relinquishing the Holy Grail vessel, the trump card of the Einsburns, Kiritsugu now had to participate in the Holy Grail War with terms similar to that of outsider masters. Not from the three origin families. The strategy of luring the enemy to make mistakes whilst utilizing his superiority and overlooking his defense was no longer viable. He now had to seek ambush opportunities to outsmart his leading rivals. Thinking about it, what made the strategy of jumping ahead of his opponents effective was that he could, from this point onwards, fortify his position, which was to look beyond the final stage of the battle and to set up traps about it. From the outside, the War of the Holy Grail was mending its image as a battle royale, but as the war progressed, it began to show signs of it being a battle of occupying each other's camps. The ultimate goal was to hold the ceremony for the descent of the Holy Grail. But to secure a proper place for the altar was part of the victor's path which could not be avoided. Even if Kodamin Kairei had taken possession of the vessel of the Holy Grail in the end, he had to perform the ceremony at one of these 4 key spiritual grounds. If Kiritsugu went to those places, set up traps, and could ambush him, then there was a high chance of turning the tables around. With Fuyuki Church left unoccupied, Kiritsugo unexpectedly landed in a good position of being able to secure the Tosaka residence and the Fuyuki Church, the second and third best spiritual ley lanes. The silver lining of the cloud. In order to use this to his fullest advantage, all the way till morning, Kiritsugo planted explosives into the two buildings, making them into traps. And then, since noon, he had set up a new position at Ryodo Temple, and was on the lookout all the time. Kiritsugu anticipated that Kairei would probably choose Mount Enzo as the ceremonial place. His enemy had vanished from Fuyuki Church. Naturally, there was also a possibility that his intention was to seclude himself from society. But for him to relinquish the spiritual ley line he had already secured in the first place, he would only want to perform the ceremony at the best spiritual ground. Kiritsugu thus conjectured. If he thought about it, after obliterating Tosaka, his residence was also at Kirei's disposal. But he had left that place readily, so what's left was just the Greater Holy Grail at Mount Enzo. Obviously, there was a non-zero possibility that all of these were just a bluff to mislead Kiritsugu, and that Kairei would return to Fuyuki Church or Tosaka residence. However, because of that, Kiritsugo had already set traps so that if Kirei set foot in any of the buildings, he would not be able to return alive. After being bombed to death, if the vessel of the Holy Grail was still unharmed, then victory would easily be his. As for Irisfield's life, Kiritsugu had already looked philosophically upon it as a loss. If he were to further increase his chances of outwitting Kirei, he could not disregard the Fuyuki Council Hall, the fourth spiritual ley line. As for that place, Kiritsugu settled on placing a familiar there for the purpose of surveillance. After being confirmed as being a spiritual ground, the ground of origin was left just like that without any spell-like defense being set up around it. Compared with the other three ceremonial sites, which were hard to attack and easy to defend, the council hall was not a strategic position at all, from the view of magi battles. Hypothetically speaking, if Kotomin Kairei were to appear at the city council hall, then Kiritsugu would carry out a full front assault. It was of course the worst development, but the risk of such a thing happening was also the lowest. If he acted according to priorities, whether he was right or wrong, the place he had to seize no matter what was Mount Enzo. If Maya was not harmed, she would be able to secure the city council hall and confront Kairei directly with her perfect preparations. But it was futile to lament about it. At this point, he could only rely on himself. Suddenly, Kiritsugu recalled those times after he had lost Natalia. Come to think of it, his experiences of independent action without joining anyone was surprisingly little. To have felt that unexpectedly, was it because Kiritsugu was always the one surviving in the end? Kiritsugu thought about it and felt that he had led a life distantly connected to the word alone. It could also be called a life much crueler than being alone. There was always someone beside Kiritsugu. The one making excuses all this while for killing or causing the deaths of those someones was again Kiritsugu. Both Maya and Irisfield were people he was destined to part with ever since he met them. Sure enough, as he thought, Kiritsugu was left on his own, trying to enter the final stage of the battle. To begin this way, and to end this way, this had to be Amiya Kiritsugu's fate. Someone like him who had lost so many people, such absurdity was unforgivable. From the dim shadows of the tree, at that cold look from Kiritsugu, the dry premonition she felt within her heart returned. Perhaps, even until the end of the war, she would not have the chance to respectably exchange a single word with her own master. After saying that, Saber returned to the temple grounds. Needless to say, she was neither called back, nor were there any words of appreciation before her departure. From the viewpoint of the Holy Grail contest, Kiritsugu's actions was the best plan. Even Saber herself understood that. Because of that, she could also decide without a doubt that it was safe to leave this place to him. She had no fear of leaving Kiritsugu alone. If the situation arose when the servant was needed, the compelling force of the command spells could transcend even space and summon her to his side. She had already experienced that last night and confirmed it. Whilst descending the flight of stone steps connecting the temple gate to the ground below, Saber squinted her eyes in the unpleasantly blazing sun. The enemies to be killed could not be found, and the location of the one she was to protect could not be ascertained. What's left was just her definite intuition, which told her that she could not afford to waste a single moment. Not even knowing where to go, she was spurred on from the inside by the tingling impatience. 16 hours, 5 minutes and 37 seconds. The scorching summer heat, unusual for the season, had nothing to do with Kotomin Kairei. The ice-cold humid air sank into the darkness and was completely isolated from the bustling world outside. His location possessed all the ideal properties that would allow him to wait till night had fallen and then make his move. The temporary hiding place that Kodomin Kare, who had left the Fuyuki church, had chosen was the blood-covered underground cavern that Ryuunosuke and servant Caster had once occupied as their headquarters, that is, the water tank deep within the Fuyuki city sewage system. Moreover, this was the fated place where the assassins he had summoned had been utterly humiliated. It was truly ironic that it was that memory which made Kodomin Kare choose this hiding place. The best testimony to the secrecy of this place was the fact that Caster, who had become the target of all masters after Raze's command, had managed to stay alive here after the chaotic battle in the Einsburn forest. Ryder and his master were the only ones who had found and entered this place, but there was longer any reason for them to pay attention to Caster's workshop. After ensuring his own safety, Kare reviewed the current situation of the war. On top of having eliminated Tosaka Tokiomi, befriended Mato Karia, and secured the vessel of the Grail, he had also managed to keep Saber and Ryder in a stalemate whilst his own whereabouts were unknown to all. All this was achieved within one day after his decision to return to the Heavens Field. Although luck did play its part, nothing in the world was meant to be perfect. Even Kare himself was surprised at the fact that he had immediately changed the chaotic and senseless situation of the war. Kare had usurped and taken over the advantage Tosaka Tokiomi had possessed at the beginning of the war. Archer, who had materialized into this world as the most powerful servant in this Heaven's Field, was in Kare's hands. Berserker, who was a formidable enemy due to his natural differences with Archer, had also become Kare's puppet along with his master. There was nothing else that could threaten Kodomin Kare. It didn't matter who emerged victorious between Saber and Ryder. The battle amongst servants would end as soon as the victor was eliminated by Archer's ultimate noble phantasm. On the off chance that both the King of Knights and the King of Conquerors managed to survive, or worse, if they came to an agreement and joined forces against him, then there was still the powerful Berserker to stop them. Although Mato Karia was almost in ruins after the incident with Aoi, Berserker would automatically start attacking Saber and would not require his master's command. He was opposed to using even a single command seal on Archer. He would only get the opposite result if he forced a man with such a huge ego to serve another's will. The best way was not to control this servant as a pawn, but to use him as if he were an environmental condition like the weather or the direction of the wind. A sailor could not control the wind, but he could dexterously control his boat using the sail. That was his reasoning. Archer had left for the moment because he didn't like being locked up in this underground place. Kare understood that Archer would rush back when necessary, so he did not feel uneasy in the least. Kare did not regard this king of heroes as a familiar, but as an accomplice with mutual interests. In other words, there were more efficient ways to use the command seals he had taken from Rise's hand. Even if Kare possessed no magic crests, there were many ways for him to perform magecraft provided he paid the proper price. His chances of victory were high even if he were to fight an expert magus now. The final battle tonight between servants will decide the Holy Grail's final destination. As an onlooker, all Kare needed to do was wait for the right opportunity. As a master, his main concern was actually a battle of strategies beyond that of the servants. Kaire's greatest enemy would be in that battle, Emiya Kiritsugo. He would be the only one still capable of taking away the advantage in Kare's hands at this stage. In his heart, Kare had always looked forward to the duel with him. However, since the opponent was a thorough assassin, the kind of encounter that Kare wished for would never come about. He would have to frequently consider the situation of the battle and continue to ensure his advantage if he were to create a scenario in which he could fight Emiya Kiritsugu face to face. If Kiritsugu took the upper hand, Kare would definitely be finished without ever seeing what his opponent looked like. If that were to happen, then all would have been for naught. Emiya Kiritsugu could not obtain information concerning this water tank. He was reassured of that. Had that not been the case, Ryuunosuke would have been eliminated even sooner than he had. He would not suffer a sudden attack from Kiritsugu as long as he remained hidden here. For now, all he needed to do was keep his opponent worrying and running around blindly. Kare would be the one to decide the location of the duel. Kiritsugu operated strictly according to logic. Kare would predict his moves and turn that logic against him, misleading him until he had no choice but to voluntarily appear before Kare. That goal was already finalized. All that was left was to wait for night to fall. Kare cast his eyes to a corner of the darkness when he heard a painful moan. The Einsburn homunculus that he had gotten Berserker to kidnap was lying there face up. She wasn't lying there naturally. A simple magic circle had been drawn around her to allow the surrounding prana to flow in. Although this location was not above a line yine, there was still leftover prana gathered here from when Caster had greedily devoured the souls of those he had sacrificed. Putting aside whether this supply made her comfortable, it was enough to stabilize her condition. Of course, it would have been easy if he were to simply cut open her abdomen now and take out the vessel of the Grail. However, Kairi wished for a chance to speak with her. That was why he was wasting his effort to provide her with prana.
Can you hear me, woman?
The homunculus opened her eyes, breathing faintly. Her empty gaze was without focus and her eyesight had evidently diminished, but she still recognized the voice of her nemesis.
Kotamine. Kairi. Like I thought, you're the one.
The victor of the Heavens Field is about to be decided. Perhaps I will be the one to complete the ancient wish of your Einsburn house.
Although he was not confident enough to declare absolute victory, such a conclusion was a conservative estimate.
You still have an attitude and are so uncooperative. Are you so displeased with me?
Of course. There's only one person I will entrust the Holy Grail to, and that would never be you, Executor.
Although she found it difficult even to speak, the hatred and power in her voice made Kairi furrow his brows.
I don't understand. You're nothing but a doll that carries the Holy Grail. The completion of the ceremony should be your only concern, rather than who may win the war. Why are you so bent on certain masters in your current condition?
Yes, how could you possibly understand? You're the kind of person who doesn't even have a wish to bestow upon the Holy Grail.
The loathing mockery made Kairi even more baffled. Was this woman really just a homunculus? Why did a homunculus, which didn't even have a soul, possess emotions?
Kotamine Kairi, you're an empty man who doesn't even understand the meaning of battle. You'll never win against that man. Be prepared. My knight, my husband will surely destroy you.
What made Kairi more baffled was the content of her words. How could this homunculus look into his heart with such accuracy? Tokiomi could not do that, nor could his own father or wife.
Scared? Fine, I'll tell you. Emiya Kiritsugu has seen through you. He is alarmed by you and therefore regards you as the greatest enemy. Kiritsugu will fall upon you in a way more cruel and merciless than anyone else. Be prepared.
So that was why Kirei nodded with satisfaction. If it was that man, if those who could understand Kirei truly existed, then that man must be the same kind of person as Kirei. Emiya Kiritsugu did not let him down. Though the two of them had never met, he had nevertheless made the most appropriate evaluation of Kotomin Kirei.
Thank you, woman. That is a blessing for me. The man Emiya Kiritsugu is truly just as I had imagined.
However, a bout of mocking laughter answered Kirei.
You're such a foolish man. You're saying you understand Emiya Kiritsugu? Don't make me laugh. You aren't even up to his heel and worth.
What did you say?
The sudden sound made his entire body shiver. He could not forget that sentence.
True. Emiya Kiritsugu can see through you. But you'll never see through him. Kotamine Kirei, you don't have any of the things that man has in his soul.
Kairi grasped her slender neck before more mocking words could flow out of her throat. The rage and confusion swirling within Kairei's heart at that moment was incomparable to what he had felt back in the Iceburn Forest, even if the fatal battle there was to be repeated.
I admit it. True, I'm an empty man. I have nothing.
His roaring seemed to be calm at the beginning, or maybe traces of agitation only surfaced later on.
But what's the difference between Kiritsugu and me? Between me and that man who only devoted himself to senseless war? A man who never got anything out of it but only repeated his slaughter? He departed so much from common sense and he got absolutely nothing. What is he, if not a lost soul?
Kairi rebuked her desperately and hoarsely. His inquiry was like the angry roar of an anguished soul that could not obtain the answer it sought, even after having experienced every kind of trial imaginable.
Homunculus, answer me if you can. Why does Emiya Kiritsugu seek the Holy Grail? What is the wish that man bestowed upon the all-powerful wish-granting vessel?
As if provoking her, Kairi loosened his hands, which were grasped around the homunculus's neck, and permitted her to breathe so she could answer him. There was an unspoken warning that if he received a vague answer, he would end her breathing forever. Even so, this woman did not express even a sliver of terror. Kneeling before Kairi's knees, she weakly gasped for oxygen in such a pitiful manner. But the look that she gave Kairi still contained the derision and superiority reserved for the victor. It was almost as if Kirei was the one kneeling.
All right, I'll tell you. Emiya Kiritsugu's lasting hope is to save humanity. It is to end all wars and bloodshed and achieve eternal world peace.
That only seemed like jestful nonsense for Kairi. After a few seconds, he burst out laughing.
What was that?
You can't understand it. That is the difference between you and him. You believe in nothing while he does.
Woman, what are you to Emiya Kiritsugu?
I gave birth to his child as his wife. I've looked into his heart and shared his worries for the past 9 years.
Unlike you, who has never seen him.
9 years. Perhaps he had passed such a long time in a lie. Kairi had such doubts, but he instinctively felt it would be impossible. What existed in this woman's heart was undoubtedly her trust toward Emiya Kiritsugu. It would be unimaginable to form such a strong personality within her if she based it on an empty lie. This woman was originally only an ordinary homunculus after all. The focus of his anger began to shift away from this woman before her. Kairi gave out a melancholic sigh and sat down onto the chair next to him.
Irisfiel von Ainsburn, were you always a good wife in those 9 years? Did you win Emiya Kiritsugo's love?
Why do you care?
I don't understand the bond between you two. You took pride in having Emiya Kiritsugu as your husband, and trust him as if you're a real couple. However, if Emiya Kiritsugu is a man who seeks the Holy Grail, you should have been just a tool with which to fulfill his wish. He has no reason to give you something as unnecessary as love.
I won't forgive you if you laugh at him for being stupid.
Those were the decisive words spoken by one who had something that could not be violated.
I have no parents and am not a product of love. Therefore, I can't understand what a good wife is. Even so, the love he gave me is my entire world. No one can humiliate that.
Then, Irisfiel, you're a perfect wife.
Kairi said, as if making a disinterested judgment. It was not praise, nor was it sarcasm.
But I can't understand Emiya Kiritsugu because of that. Since he loves you as a wife, then why? Why would he want eternal world peace? Why would he sacrifice his loved one for such a pointless aspiration?
Such an odd question. For you, a man who has admitted that he has no reason for existence? You're mocking others and saying their aspirations are meaningless?
Any sensible adult would have laughed at him.
This was an anger completely different from before. Kairi's heart swelled up.
Combat is instinctive of humanity. Eliminating it is no different from eliminating humans. What else could be more pointless? This so-called aspiration of Emiya Kiritsugu's, it shouldn't have been called an aspiration to begin with, but the dream of a child.
That is why he could only rely on a miracle.
Irisfiel tried her best to keep her cool and continued speaking.
He lost everything for the aspiration he sought. He always suffered through his punishments for wanting to save those that could not be saved, and everything around him was robbed. I am also someone taken away from him. He has been forced to discard his loved ones many times.
Kairi stood up from his chair and gazed at Irisfiel with a bottomless and gloomy look.
You're saying it's not just limited to this once, but that this is the way of existence for this man.
Yes, Kiritsugu's far too gentle. He doesn't hold back on his love even though he knows he will lose those around him sooner or later.
Those answers were enough for Kairi. He completely lost interest in the homunculus before him.
I understand.
He grasped the woman's neck with his strong fingertips and stopped her blood flow. Looking at the other's weak and painful expression, Kairi calmly said,
I finally understand. So this is Emiya Kiritsugu.
4 hours, 16 minutes, and 49 seconds. Waver woke from a deep and dreamless sleep. What he saw when he opened his eyes was a blackness like that of sleep. The thicket in which he had fallen asleep during the daytime was now completely mired in a hazily starlit darkness. The curtain of night descended again. To those who commanded servants, this was a time of battle that could not be avoided. The night wind, as bitter cold as the intent to murder, did not make him uneasy in the slightest. Right beside him was a presence that could make his fear and unease vanish into thin air. Ryder, who had already materialized, had already made a thorough preparation for battle and was currently flipping through his anthology of Homer's poetry. This hardcover, so heavy and depressing to Waver, was small and thin in the eyes of the King of Conquerors. The large man was completely immersed in the world of words. As he flipped through the book, his gestures were enthusiastic. He especially cherished details as minute as the touch under his fingertips. It looked as if he was really very fond of that book. Waver could not help but smile wryly. If he were to suddenly ask Ryder, why were you born to this world? Perhaps his reply might not be his ambition to conquer the world, but without fingers I would be unable to read this anthology of Homer's poetry. That was the sort of person this man was. A hero whose heart yearned for something far away, who enjoyed good food and wine, who regarded his ambition of conquering the world to be as common a desire as eating or sleeping. This peculiar personality had drawn many men to follow him for a lifetime.
Anne? Kid? Are you awake?
Though Ryder had already read Achilles' adventures countless times before, his interest was nevertheless undiminished. He smiled like a mischievous child as he looked at Waver. Perhaps he would always show this smile no matter whom it was for, no matter if it was for the heroes with which he had lived and died side by side, or for a master with no redeeming qualities, like Waver.
Didn't I tell you to wake me as soon as it was night? What exactly are you doing?
Ah, sorry. I got engrossed in reading without realizing it. But the night is still young. I don't think we have to be so anxious tonight. Just facing it while at ease, we'll be all right.
Why?
The subsequent question caused the large man to open his mouth, then fall into thought.
Oh. In any case, I don't have any proof. But I have a premonition that there can be a decisive battle tonight.
He said as if there was no problem. Waver nodded lightly and did not question Ryder's reasoning. He could not explain why, but the air that brushed against his skin made him feel like the heavens feel had entered a climactic stage. If it had to be put in words, then it was because the air tonight was too peaceful. As far as Waver knew, the only eliminated opponents were Assassin, whom Ryder had personally crushed, and Caster, who had been defeated at Mion River. But of course, in places he could not see, the battle was still ongoing, still developing. Every day and night he could feel that the unusual presences appearing in this town were changing, shifting from a chaotic commotion to a heavy sense of urgency. This was also one of the reasons why the impatience he felt now left less of an imprint in his mind than the anxiety caused by Saber, with whom they had fought last night. It seemed that an emergency situation had also emerged in the Einsburn camp. Therefore, Waver did not say anything to contradict Ryder's instinct. It was precisely because he was the king of conquerors who had galloped through innumerable battlefields and issued commands and strategies that his sixth sense was much more reliable than that of Waver, who lacked experience. Whether Lord El Malloy was still alive and well now, news concerning his once-hated enemy only made him feel vaguely sad. Waver had already experienced the unimaginably difficult self-cultivation required to rush forth into battle with a heroic spirit. Even though he had a reputation for genius in the area of thaumaturgy, the heavens feel could not be surmised according to the logic of Magi. When he considered that there had once been a time when El Malloy had undergone the same difficult self-cultivation, he felt satisfied, and yet at the same time a thread of sympathy could not help but appear in his heart. Among the six masters, Kenneth alone had shared a connection with Waver, regardless of whether that relationship had been good or bad, that such feelings could be evoked in him towards an opponent with whom he had fought bitterly since they had first met. Waver once again felt the change in the workings of his heart. Yes. No matter what the premonition was, to him, the heavens feel was as good as ended. The moment he began to sigh, a light yet distinct impact dispersed his drowsiness.
What is...
This surge of prana is very strange, like I have encountered it before.
Hearing Ryder say this, Waver remembered. The smoke signal with which the Holy Church had summoned the Masters. This was exactly the same feeling as then. To get a look at the sky, he walked out of the thicket. To the northeast appeared a flash of magical lightning, accompanied by colors even brighter than those of the first summons.
This shape is...
What is this? A sort of sign?
Hearing Ryder's question, Waver, though unsure, still nodded his head.
Differently colored light, 4 and 7. It is Emperor, accomplishment, and Chariot, victory. To give this sort of signal, unless this means that the winner of the Heavens Feel has already been determined.
Waver's explanation made Ryder furrow his brow.
What is this? Treating me as if I don't exist? Exactly who is it that has taken the victory?
This was truly strange. In the Heavens Feel, only by eliminating all enemy masters and servants could victory be counted. But as things were, Ryder and Waver were standing right there. How could the declaration of victory be made?
Also, that position is not where Fuyuki Church is. Very strange. Maybe it's not a signal from the people from the church.
Ah, if you put it that way, that's a possibility I can accept.
Hearing Waver's doubt, Ryder snorted disdainfully through his nose and nodded his head.
Why... what's the matter?
It must be that some impatient fellow has taken it upon himself to make the declaration of victory with the challenge. If you object, then come here. In other words, it is meant to draw opponents to the decisive battleground that he himself designates.
Ryder gave a sinister laugh. Staring at the smoke signal shining in the sky, he seemed to be saying, that coincides with my own intentions. The King of Conqueror's burly frame was trembling with joy and fighting spirit. Waver regarded the strong and brave heroic spirit with an icy gaze as if waiting and watching from a distance.
Is it finally the last phase?
That's right. Since the battleground has already been decided, I cannot bring shame to the class of Ryder.
Ryder drew the Celtic longsword and raised it high into the sky.
Appear, my precious horse.
Accompanying the call, a radiance that pierced through space shone forth from within the torn void. Shining with the light of heroic spirits appeared a steed Waver was familiar with. The hoofed heroic spirit horse, Bucephalus. the precious legendary horse that had once carried the king of conquerors to trample upon the eastern world. Today, it passed through time to return to the side of its Ali. As it sped across the tarred road, it gave a cry of thirst for battle. Alexander's trump card Ionian Heteroi required the opening of a reality marble to correct interference from the world if its various aspects were to be gathered together. Nonetheless, like Mithrians who had taken on the role of messenger at Meon River, if only a single horse and rider which were to appear, then it was within the boundaries of ordinary space. Having lost Gordius' wheel, the best place for Ryder to unleash his riding skill was now on its back.
Come, kid, even if it's not as stable as sitting in the charioteer seat, put up with it for a while. Come up here.
Ryder, on the back of his beloved horse, nudged his body backward to make space for Waver. Nevertheless, Waver smiled wryly and shook his head. Only heroes were qualified to ride on the back of a steed that was second to none in the entire world. It was definitely not a place to be taken by ordinary youngsters. For instance, a useless magus who could not even cast a hypnosis spell, the most basic of basics. Or for instance, a clown who overrated himself and only got in the way of the despotic path of the king. The glorious road on which the king of conquerors Alexander was about to rush forth could not be arbitrarily sullied. Waver understood that, the night before, it had been he, the master, who had at the last moment caused Ryder's determination to challenge Saber to end in vain. At that time, if Ryder had challenged the sort of promised victory with a desperate heart, then perhaps he would have been victorious over Saber's noble phantasm by a small distance and trampled the king of knights beneath the hooves of the divine bulls. The reason why he could not but give up at the decisive moment had been the master standing beside him in the driver's seat. At the last instant, Ryder could only jump from the chariot in order to protect the clown beside him. Of course, he could not sacrifice the contractor who had made him appear in this world. At that time, what had decided the victory between Ryder and Saber had been whether or not their master had been at their side. Waver Velvet had once thought he had what it took to become a victor, and had been complacent about it. But now it was different. Now, after 2 weeks had passed, after he had personally witnessed true heroes, now, as he understood his own useless and meager existence, a dog without a home has its own intentions as well. At the very least, it can gaze upon that back, the nobility of which it can never match.
My servant. I, Waver Velvet, use a command seal to give this order.
The youth raised his tightly clenched right hand, displaying the command seals that were as yet unused. These were the shackles that bound the heroic spirit before his eyes, the greatest obstacle that blocked his despotic road.
Ryder, you must take the final victory.
This was not a restriction, only a judgment that was a matter of course. Therefore, Waver gave the order. His heart was light as he watched the first of the command seals unleash its prana and disappear.
Again, I use a command seal to give this order, Ryder. You must seize the grail.
The second command seal also vanished. He felt a thread of pain in his heart for this light. If he stayed his hand now, there would still be time. This meaningless confusion swept across his heart. It was a fool's hesitation not worth mentioning.
Lastly, I use a command seal to give this order.
Waver resolutely raised the hand on which the last command seal was drawn, looking at the king who rode on the horse's back. In that instant, Waver could meet his eyes without the slightest show of timidity. This was his last and only glory as a master.
Ryder, you must seize the whole world. Failure is not allowed.
Swiftly liberated, the third holy mark radiated hidden prana. Summoning a whirlwind, it disappeared. Waver the Magus would probably never again have the chance to perform such tremendous thaumaturgy in his life. But even thus, he felt from the bottom of his heart that this was the most satisfying action of his life. He had no regret whatsoever. In compensation for losing everything, this was enough. Waver lowered his head to look at his own hands. The proof of the contract etched on his hand had already vanished and left no trace.
And thus I am no longer your master,
Waver said, looking at his feet with his head bowed. He did not want to know what expression Ryder wore as he looked at him. Perhaps it was surprise at Waver's cowardly act of giving up the fight. Perhaps it was a relieved smile at having been freed from the hands of a useless master. Regardless of which it was, Waver did not want to see it. If it were possible, he even wished that Ryder would forget the entire process of their encounter.
Go. You can go anywhere. You are all ready.
Oh, rang out the quiet reply. Subsequently, he should hear the sound of a horse's hooves swiftly galloping away over the land. Even as Waver thought this, he was lifted by the collar. In the next instant, he was sitting on Bucephalus's back.
Of course I will go at once. But, since you have given that annoying command, surely you're also determined. Come to witness the moment in which the order is fulfilled.
You idiot! I say, eh?
His will having been changed so easily, Waver cried out awkwardly. Bucephalus gave a rough cry through its nose as if mocking his panic. Even that horse mocked people in the same way as its rider, thinking this. Driven by an indignation that even he did not understand, Waver cried out.
I don't have command seals anymore. I don't want to be a master anymore. Why do you still want to take me with you?
Whether you are or are not a master, you are my friend, and that will never change.
Waver knew that these words, spoken along with the smile that was the same as always, had been spoken to him. In that instant, the hardest part of his heart crumbled, even though he had protected it with his life. Only a moment was required to destroy it. The tears flooded like a spring unending from his eyes, mixing with snot as they flowed past his nose. He found it difficult to breathe, and even more difficult to make a sound. Even so, he still asked in a choked voice.
Premio, someone like me, can I really be by your side?
After going forth into battle with me so many times, why are you saying all this? You idiot!
As if listening to jokes at a banquet, the king of conquerors poked fun at the youth's tears. He slapped his thin, weak shoulders.
Aren't you a real man who has faced enemies with me? So, you are a friend. Stick out your chest and stand shoulder to shoulder with me.
Waver forgot self-deprecation. He forgot the mortification before today, the timidity towards tomorrow, as well as the fear in the moment facing death. Fight and win. This unshakable conviction took root in his heart. There would be no failure. There would be no disgrace. Now he was with the king, and as long as one believed and continued to run forth on the despotic road, one would set foot, no matter how unreliable those feet, on the edge of the world. This he firmly believed.
So, I should make my answer to the first command seal now. Open your eyes wide and look properly, boy.
I will definitely use this pair of eyes to watch.
The legendary steed gave a cry of assured victory and began to gallop, carrying the king and Magus, whose hearts were linked, rushing towards the decisive battle with a mortal enemy. The location indicated by the smoke signal was the opposite bank of the Mion River, the fourth ley line of Fuyuki. 4 hours, 10 minutes, and 33 seconds. Fuyuki City Hall, this structure, which had been built at the cost of 8 billion yen, was considered the symbol of Fuyuki Shinto's development, along with the central building in front of the train station. It covered an area of 6,600 square meters and had 4,700 square meters of usable space. Its complex design housed 4 floors above ground and 1 floor below. The 2-storied music hall could accommodate about 3,000 patrons. The building's prestigious architect had created a novel design that made this modern city hall as majestic and splendid as an ancient shrine. Fuyuki City's high ambition toward Shinto's development could thus be seen in physical form. However, only the exterior was complete. The interior was still being decorated in preparation for the commemoration ceremony. Active and practical use of the building was still a long way off. In addition to the minimal level of safety precautions, the building still had no access to electricity. Deep in the night, with no workers on site, this pristine and splendid building became an unreal space with an inhuman silence and an alien feeling flowing and drifting through its emptiness. Civil planning did not take magecraft into consideration. It was a complete coincidence that the city hall had been built on top of Fuyuki's latest ley line. In other words, such a rare coincidence could only be attributed to the paranormal characteristics bestowed upon the area by the ley line. Kodomin Kairei stood on the rooftop and calmly watched the magecraft signals he had set off as they scattered to smoke in the night wind. The only thing he had needed to do to infiltrate the unguarded building was break the lock. He had already made preparations for the ceremony and was ready to confront an attack. All that was left was to stay and wait for the remaining enemies to be attracted by the signal. However,
You look unprecedentedly ferocious tonight, Kairei.
with the gentle sound of his shoes, Archer appeared on the rooftop of the township. On the inside, Kairei smiled wryly. How does his iron mask, which should be the same as usual, look reflected in the eyes of this heroic spirit who sees through everything? Even the subtleties in his emotions that he himself could not detect did not escape from Archer's eyes. Kairei was shaken by this in the beginning, but now it was familiar. Really, I wonder if I am excited. He understood himself as though he was analyzing the business of another. The king of heroes, who had just returned from the nightlife districts, still wore his flamboyant and luxurious casual clothing. His bewitching pair of red eyes left behind the afterglow of pleasure, and he showed no sense of urgency to face the decisive battle. This heroic spirit would never separate his outer appearance from his inner feelings. After all, for him the conclusion over the Holy Grail was not out of the realm of entertainment.
Well, what do you want to do, Kair? Is it all right if I just wait here?
One wrong command could make Archer question the worth of his master. Kairei, who knew this very well, shook his head after thinking carefully.
If you unleash your power near the Holy Grail, you may endanger the ritual itself. If you want to do so, then intercept them.
Yes, very well. But what do you plan to do if you're attacked while I'm away?
Get Berserker to stall, and in that gap, call you back. At that time, I will borrow the power of the command seals to save myself. You wouldn't mind, would you?
It is permitted. However, I can't guarantee the safety of the Holy Grail. I won't hold back tonight. Such a cramped pavilion could be blown away entirely.
That would be the worst outcome. But if that happens, it would be fate.
Kairi nodded decisively, but Archer narrowed his eyes.
Kairi, it looks as if you have understood the meaning of this war. But do you still not have a wish to bestow upon the Holy Grail? Not a single wish, even if you do manage to obtain the miracle.
That's right. What's wrong with that?
Although it's yet to be completed, the vessel is already in your hands. It may accept a pre-ordered wish, you know.
I see. You're saying that, if possible, a miracle can occur at the same time when the Holy Grail descends, right?
Kairi sighed disinterestedly and thought about it for a while. In the end, he still shook his head.
I still don't have a wish. If I have to have one, then I wish for there not to be any innocent people meddling with us in the final battle. Unfortunately, there are residents all around us. I had wanted to fight for my victory somewhere desolate if possible.
Hearing this completely boring answer, Gilgamesh said with derision,
The thing hiding in your heart will only be truly understood in the presence of the Holy Grail.
At the end of the day, even if those two were closer to the Holy Grail than anyone else, they also cared the least for it. For those two, compared to gaining the Holy Grail, it was more meaningful to chase away those who had gathered because of it.
There's one more thing. If Saber appears before I return...
As he was about to depart, the King of Heroes halted in his steps, as if having suddenly thought of something.
Then let Berserker play with her for a little while. I saved that mad dog's life just for this.
Understood.
Kairi still could not figure out the reason why Archer was so bent on Saber. As for Berserker, who had longed to destroy the King of Heroes after their initial battle, things were different. The King of Heroes had allowed for Berserker's continued existence after discovering his true name in his investigation of Madokaria. He had said, "It'll be entertaining to let that dog bite Saber." The King of Heroes could always control his anger whenever it came to Saber. It seemed Gilgamesh was very interested in the King of Knights.
Say, Kire, how's that doll? The one Saber protected at the risk of her life. I heard that whatchamacallit, Vessel of the Grail, is in it.
Ah, that's what you meant.
Kairi did not want to mention its existence. His interest was gone at this stage. He did not even feel the need to remember the woman's name.
I just killed her. There was no longer any reason to keep her alive.
Sivasfiel opened her eyes and looked around at her surroundings. She felt very strange. Her consciousness was impeccably clear, and yet she could not think logically. It seemed like it was not her mentality that had become muddled and nonsensical, but the world she was in. Many scenes flashed past her eyes. When she beheld them, the only emotion that welled up within her heart was an unbearable sorrow and emptiness. The scenes reflected in her eyes were eternally sundered from happiness or joy. That was the only constant in this kaleidoscope of confusion. There was pain, there was humiliation, and there was regret, hatred, and loss. Bloodshed and a desolate land. Betrayal and vengeance. Having devoted everything and yet receiving nothing in return. It was an expensive cycle that reaped no rewards. The familiar snow-covered scene continued on. It was recounting the story of a clan that had sealed all it possessed within a castle of deep winter. And here she finally remembered. What she was looking down upon was the Einsborn family's 1,000-year-long pilgrimage for the Holy Grail. The primeval Justies and the female dolls modeled after her. They were homunculi, fake living beings. They were humanoid disposables created with the secret craft of alchemy and used to fulfill the unattainable lasting wish. If any place had existed such that allowed her to see all of this, then it could only be the epicenter of the entire conflict, within the thing that had witnessed all. Irisfiel finally understood. She was looking inside the Holy Grail. It was the Greater Grail that embraced the primeval Justies, the Greater Grail of Mount Enzo. All homunculi were manufactured to the standard of the Lady of Winter, using her as their model. Therefore, they shared the same pain. No, was that really the truth? When she came to, Irisfiel discovered that she was in the room of her child, protected by the warmth of the fireplace. Although her heart was terrified, Iliaviel's two red eyes still looked at Irisfiel with trust. Though her face looked the same as her mother's and all of her sisters', this child was different. She was more adorable than anyone else. Irisfiel embraced her daughter tightly. Her silver-white fringe brushed past her daughter's face, which was wet with tears.
It's all right, it's all right. That won't happen. You won't see such things, Ilya.
There was one sad wish that only Irisfiel possessed out of her innumerable sisters and could not share with anyone else, and that was the maternal love of a mother. Out of the many generations of homunculi, she had been the first to give birth to a child from her womb. Out of all of her kind, only she had been given a love for her child. But even so, the fate she carried was just as lamentable. Ilyasfiel von Einsborn was the next vessel of the Grail, and also a mechanical part swept up in the 1,000-year-old cogwheel of delusion and stubbornness. This shackle would not break until someone claimed victory. The third magic, the Heavensfeel, that achievement was the only salvation. Many sounds rushed towards Irisfiel. She chanted with her countless sisters, "The Holy Grail, please grant the Holy Grail into my hands." Deep within the forest, where the used homunculi were discarded, the mountain of corpses composed of her kin chanted. Those rotten, maggot-infested faces overlapped with Ilya's young and small face and emitted those painful sounds.
It's all right.
Full of love, the mother hugged her daughter tightly in her arms.
Ilya, you'll definitely be freed from this shackle of fate. I will finish everything. Your daddy will definitely fulfill this wish as well.
At that moment, a question suddenly flashed past her thoughts. If this was a dream conjured by the Holy Grail, since she could see the vessel within so clearly and it had taken shape, then what would Irisfiel, who served as the outer cover, look like now? It was as if the eggshell could see the innards of the chick. If so, then this would be a giant contradiction. The shell was supposed to break when the chick hatched. Then, who was the Irisfiel that was dreaming? The touch of Ilyasfiel's slender body, which she was hugging tightly, was so realistic. Irisfiel looked to her own hands, which were hugging her daughter. Irisfiel had already disappeared. If the chick had consumed the broken shell, the falling snow outside the window suddenly stopped. What melted into the darkness of the night was a thick black mud that stirred up ripples. She wasn't scared, nor was she surprised. She only comprehended it calmly and gazed upon it. The mud seeped in from all corners of the room and dripped from the chimney, slowly soaking the ground under her feet. Yes, the question of "who am I?" was so minuscule. She had been no one since the start. Even now she was still someone who used the personality of Irisfiel, a woman who had already disappeared, as a mask. Even so, Irisfiel's wish, hidden in her heart, remained true. It was the wish of a mother who thought of her beloved daughter and lamented the future of her child, even as she drew her last breath and passed away. She had inherited the wish of this mother. Therefore, she was the one who must fulfill that wish. She was the existence that had been worshipped and anticipated because she was to grant everyone's wish, because she was made to be the one.
It's all right, Ilyasfiel. Everything is about to end.
Gently, she murmured beside the ear of the young girl whom she was embracing for the first time.
So let us wait here a while. Father will definitely come. He'll come to help us fulfill all of our wishes.
The scorching mud that clung tightly to her had elegantly dyed her skirt black. As she waited for the moment when the wish would be granted, the woman with her body entangled in the inky darkness smiled. Dispel all sorrows and chase away all worries. Soon she would receive the power to fulfill wishes and become the omnipotent wish-granting vessel that could realize all.